Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to introduce you to everyone in Lerner world. Why don't you start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your educational background?
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. So I'm Iliya Gutin. I'm a research assistant professor with the Maxwell School and an affiliate with the Lerner Center. Um, I got my PhD in sociology in 2021 from UNC Chapel Hill. I then did a postdoctoral fellowship at the Population Research Center at UT Austin. And then I worked for a year as a program officer at the National Academy of Sciences in the Committee on Population. And I'm very happy to be at Syracuse.
Yay, we're so happy to have you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your research? What are you interested in? Like what areas do you typically cover?
Sure.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, broadly, well, kind of working my way down. Most broadly, I'm a social demographer and medical sociologist. Um, though there's a lot of overlap in those two areas. That kind of social demographer side of me is kind of just studying population health issues, social disparities in health, social determinants of health, all those various things. And then the medical sociologist side of me is, I guess, a little more interested in questions of theory and measurement as it pertains to health, kind of recognizing that this health thing that we're all interested in studying is has a lot of social dimensions to it, not just in terms of its determinants, but how we think about and conceptualize health and define it, and then kind of try to measure it when it comes to research. So a lot of my research concerns that. And I guess even more specifically than that, right now at Syracuse, I'm working with Jennifer Montez and Shannon Monette on their work looking at these contextual drivers of health and mortality, especially with respect to state level policy factors that might be influencing that. And I have some work that I think is related to that, that is generally looking at kind of international comparisons of health, drawing on both vital statistics data, but also trying to do that from a survey research perspective, which is a little more challenging, but I hope worthwhile. So.
Yeah, yeah. So what got you interested into all things health and what made you want to go and decide to like research these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was often try to reflect on that. I think I've generally been interested in health. This might sound weird for a long time, like since quote unquote high school. Um, I went to a high school, it was a magnet high school where it was upon reflection pretty ambitious what they asked. They ask 14-year-olds to try to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their life when they
Oh,
apply in terms of, so I was in they were called academies. It was Academy for Medical Science and Technology. So most people who were part of this subdivision of the magnet school were interested in health and careers in health. And I think actually most have gone on to be physicians or nurses or something along those lines. So I guess pretty successful in that
yeah,
regard.
I was gonna say.
But
I
but
wish I
but
had done that, right? Yeah.
yeah. And I think I pretty early on knew that I was interested in health, but not necessarily from that like medical science side of things. I think just yeah, probably just more interested in kind of these understanding variation in health in the population, but not necessarily at that kind of individual level.
Mhm.
So I was fortunate through college. I basically studied sociology all throughout college and got exposed to demography and medical sociology pretty early on. So I was able to just kind of, I guess, build on that kind of naive inherent interest in a more like organic way by way of like just good coincidences in terms of coursework and the substantive stuff. And so I guess it was kind of like, yeah, it was like this little seed that I had way back when, and then kind of being fortunate to have a kind of sociological population demographic perspective on that be presented to me, if you will,
Yeah.
at a good time when I started to think about these things a little more seriously in college, and then just kind of took it from there, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. What an awesome school you went to that, fostered
So-
that type of thinking at such a young age, you know?
Fair enough, fair enough.
Although
Yeah.
I think at 14, I maybe would have told them I wanted to be, like an astronaut or a painter or something. So
Yeah,
I
I
would have
mean,
gotten put in the other
yeah,
group.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was good, it's kind of like like I said, a good proportion of people end up doing, I think, what they want to do, and then the other half are in finance and consulting. So, so make of that what you will.
So, it seems like you cover a wide array of things related to population health. But thinking back on the research that you've done, or maybe even some of the work that you're doing right now with Shannon and Jennifer, what do you think is one of the biggest takeaways you have from your research that has really changed the way either you think about a system or policies, or even maybe just health research in general?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I think for me, this is like I'm trying to think like with this kind of more macro level thought I've been having, which honestly isn't directly perhaps related to any one individual project, but it's just a recurring theme is and it's a little biased because I think it's rooted in how I think about health, is how hard it is to work backwards from health outcomes, like to understand their kind of their, I guess the technical term people use is their etiologies, so their origins, where
Yeah.
and it's no one's fault. It's just interesting to me how often, we go into projects with a specific health outcome in mind and a specific kind of um, way of thinking about how our predictors of that outcome are associated with it. And again, then that's not implying that people have like preconceived biases or notions of how they think a project is just going to unfold. It's just a thought that I often have, where it's hard to understand a lot of the associations that we observe, because at the end of the day, we only have so much information to work from. And you know, I think we do know a lot about why people die of certain things, or why people have a certain health condition, or why people engage in a certain health behavior. But, at the end of the day, it's these are this is why I say, like, health's a complicated thing, and
Yeah.
it is hard. I to be a little more concise in my answer, it's humility, or that's something I think I've learned a lot doing health research, is like
Yeah.
we don't really know that much about health as I think we do, and that's okay, and that's perfectly okay. And my medical sociologist side of me often reflects on the fact that health is tricky because it's one of those things that we want to have more certainty and knowledge about. These people want to know, better understand the causes of health, and it's an understandable impulse to me that people want to be more certain about it than we actually are. I think I'm getting a little too abstract now, but it's just
No,
this is
no.
I appreciate from working broadly in health research that, I'm always reminded of this. It's always just like, doesn't matter what, well, not doesn't, but like really you look at a broad range of health outcomes, and it's always hard to know what's
Yeah.
what's going on there. Why
Yeah.
what the mechanisms are, even if they seem very obvious. I don't think they are a lot of the time. So that's something I like to always have in the back of my mind. I think it's a valuable perspective to have when doing this kind of work and thinking about explanations.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully it keeps you curious, right? There's
100%.
always new
Yeah, yeah,
questions
yeah. That's the
to
best part.
ask and
Yeah,
explore.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So my last question for you is nothing to do with research,
Mhm.
but curious, what is your favorite like TV series or movie that you're watching right now? And you know,
Yeah, absolutely. Feel like it's like not like the most original answer, but um, slow horses are oh, no, okay.
no, never heard of it.
I
No.
feel like it's like there's like it's like the trendy show that like people of my age. Yeah, it's a show on Apple TV with Gary Oldman. It's a spy thriller type show,
Oh,
and as I was reflecting on with my girlfriend yesterday, a really key reason that I love the show, other than the show itself, is that it regularly comes out. It's you don't have to wait super long in between the seasons. So it's just nice 6 episode bursts,
Yep.
like kind of I think less often, like twice a year. Oh, it's such a rare treat to have these days. You're not just sitting trying to remember what happened before, but it's also very well made, and it's a nice little just like uh it's it has a nice little storyline a fresh little storyline every 6 episodes. Anyway,
Yeah,
I've
I'm
been
gonna look
talking
into
about
that.
this more than my research at this point.
I'm gonna look into
But
it because I just go on Apple and watch Ted Lasso over and over again. So I will
I recommend
deviate
it.
from, yeah.
I think it's a fantastic show. I think it's rightfully been well received, and I recommend it to people if they're in the mood for that kind of thing. It's not for everyone. If you feel like watching Ted Lasso, maybe it's a little bit of an abrupt shift, but I think a
You
lot of
check it
people
out, yeah.
might like it.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was
Of
really
course.
wonderful learning more about your research and your background
Oh,
and
thank
your
you.
favorite TV show of the now.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time and look forward to continuing working with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.